Hey guys, let's go to participants. Ding.
Hey, y'all.
Hi, oh
Hello.
my God. Hi, sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
No worries. Um, I think we have one other person in the waiting room, Amanda. Hey Sue, how are you? Just to fill some folks in, Sue got double booked and is gonna hop off at 7, but we're actually gonna have two experts tonight.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
Sue and her colleague Amanda, who's a really talented organizer out of Wisconsin, are going to answer kind of like tag team questions right up until the
Oh,
product.
nice. I love that.
And then at the product demo, Amanda will take over solo to do the final round of Q&A. So you should
Okay.
have Amanda Kennedy in the waiting room. Amanda Putz, right?
There's an H somewhere in there, but
A,
puts.
a hidden H. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it written in a while.
I every
Wait.
time I write it, I have to go look at it.
Wait, am I sorry? Am I supposed to let someone in from a waiting room? Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
Yeah.
this.
you've got the only permissions to do it. So
Okay.
it would be Amanda uh Putz.
Okay. How do I do that?
I
If
think
you
you
go to
get transferred
participants,
to a panelist. If you look, there's like dots to the right of her, like three dots. And I think if you
Oh,
click them, you can
wait, I
change
see
her.
9 attendees are in the waiting room. Wait, but I can't see anyone who's in there.
Hmm.
It just says, oh, start the webinar to admit them. Okay, so start it and then I could do this.
yeah, you'll have to promote her to panelist. Unless
Okay.
it's entirely possible. Maybe Amanda's not in there yet.
Okay.
I'd be shocked there, Rob,
Yeah,
knowing Amanda.
there she
Here
is.
she is.
Amanda, good to see you.
Hey,
Hey,
y'all.
good to see you too.
Welcome, welcome. We're gonna go live in about 2 minutes or so, but thank you guys. It's exciting to be here with you. Um,
I just had to scroll to find our notes, but I did find them.
Excellent.
Me and Amanda like put together some resources. I know you guys have a toolkit, but did you want us to share resources that we have that are aligned to the things we're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
All the good stuff from Represent Us for folks to dig into. Um, and if we haven't already, Kennedy, feel free to take us live and I'll start inviting folks and you'll just have to admit anyone who's in the waiting room.
Okay, I think it's live.
Great.
Sorry, this is my first time doing this, so I'm pretty sure I'm doing it correctly.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Okay. Thank you.
Quinn, who normally produces these, yesterday was his last day. So Kennedy is doing this for the very first time, and she's doing great. So, well, it's good to be here with everyone. I see we have about 22 attendees who have already joined us, and feel free to drop where you're calling from, and if you're running for office, what office you're running for in the chat. We can see you, we can read messages from you in the chat, but we can't hear you. You won't be able to come off mute for this because it is a webinar where we're doing one to many. There's also a Q&A button that you can use to submit a question at any time, and I'll try to weave it into the presentation throughout with our two wonderful experts, and it'll build a really great Q&A bank for the end where we do a dedicated 15 minutes to just make sure that we answer any questions that folks have. But I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat. I'm Rob, and I am calling from Windham, Maine, where crazily it was almost 100 degrees the last 2 days, and today finally like went back to normal weather. So a little climate fun. Awesome. Um, well, let me go ahead and officially kick us off as people continue to join here. You've tuned in for Effective Volunteer Recruitment and Management. This is a training that is all about building, training, and mobilizing a volunteer team. We're going to cover all of the key concepts and strategies for building, training, and mobilizing a volunteer team. We're going to talk about the best practices and some real campaign scenarios that our experts have been through. We'll also do a demo with our product team on how you can use goodparty.org's tools to enhance the execution of some of these tactics when you put them into action. But without further ado, I want to introduce my two experts from Represent Us, two former colleagues and people who I really respect. Why don't we start with Sue? You can give a little bit of background with your experience with volunteer organizing, and then Amanda, if you don't mind going as well. And by all means, say where you're calling from.
Awesome. So hi, everybody from across the country. I'm excited to see fellow Marylanders, East Coasters, West Coast, and everything in between. I saw Wisconsin. Oh, that's you, Amanda. But like very exciting to be here with folks from all across the country. Very quickly, my experience with organizing and working with volunteers goes back to like 1997 when I first started organizing for Clean Water Action, and we would recruit volunteers to go to our state capitol to talk about state legislation around environmental issues. I organized a countywide Citizens for Stream Restoration campaign, recruiting volunteers to help to plant trees and clean streams. And then after that, organizing around education policy to pass major legislation across the country and in, of course, my great state, home state of Maryland. And most recently, the past few years, working on democracy issues and organizing with volunteers across the country to help to support pro-democracy, nonpartisan reform that puts the power of democracy back in the hands of people. It's been incredible 20 plus years working with volunteers, and I'm very excited to talk with you about what it takes and how volunteers help us make the difference we can all make together.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Amanda?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love to talk about sort of the volunteer aspect of organizing, partly because I was a volunteer for a really, really long time. And so I come at this work from that unique perspective. Oh, I should tell you a little bit, I suppose, about myself too. Madison, Wisconsin. I'm the state director at Rep Us. So yeah, I was a volunteer for a long time. So because of that, I always kind of keep the volunteer experience at the forefront of my mind. And so easily enough, worked on a lot of campaigns, various electoral campaigns as a volunteer, and then sort of, went into the world of then starting to do campaign management for local candidates. And then, of course, working at Represent Us, where doing some state campaigns and, of course, helping out organizers who are running other state campaigns. So kind of from all perspectives, the volunteer, kind of running volunteers with my own campaigns running, and then, of course, helping other organizers to work with volunteers as well. So super excited to be here, and I'll pass it back to Rob.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to get us kind of right into it, talking about some of the best practices that go into building a strong volunteer culture for a campaign, or for any campaign for that matter, as my dog begins to bark. What are some of the foundational principles of building a strong volunteer team? Some of the best practices that come to mind. And I think I'm going to do reverse order. Amanda, if you want to take the first stab, and then Sue, have you chime in second.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Sue and I kind of talked about some of our experiences with working with volunteers, and we discovered that we sort of add on to each other's thoughts quite a bit. So it'll be fun to sort of see this in action, I hope. So first and foremost, I guess in terms of foundational principles, I think about, again, sort of that respect piece. I always like to tell people that when you're working with volunteers, you want to do two things. One is that you want to sort of empower them and include them and respect them. At the same time, you're being really mindful that whatever it is that you're asking them to do is moving the campaign in the direction that it needs to go. So being really mindful of their time, their energy, their effort. And you do that a lot through thinking about how am I including them, making sure that you're respecting them, and going from there.
That's excellent, Amanda. And thank you, Rob. I agree with Amanda. It's a human-centered approach. Our volunteers are not, they're there because they believe in you, they believe in what you represent and why you're running. And so the fact that they're showing up for you and showing up for your cause says a lot about what brought them to the table. So really respecting and valuing that and digging into what brought them there and really being conscious of that the whole entire time. And then I also think about from a principal perspective, in the design, when you're thinking about the volunteer, always think about the volunteer from the perspective of volunteers show up with different levels of capacity and desire to engage, and having opportunities for every level of engagement and recognizing that some people are going to be your little bit engaged people, and then moderately, and then the very engaged, right? They're at every action, they're phone banking, they are like the deep believers in the movement. Not everybody's going to get to that level, and some folks are going to sit at the different levels. So just thinking about that whole volunteer experience, thinking about every volunteer and recognizing that if you can provide space for every person to take action in the way that they can take action, you're going to create a universe of experience for anyone that wants to get involved in your campaign.
Awesome. Um, so I'd love for you to talk about some of the pitfalls. You mentioned the best practices, but where do you see campaigns fail when it comes to volunteer programs? And to really like zoom in on it a little bit, I'd love to hear from each of you your top 2 or 3 management mistakes that you tend to see candidates or their campaigns make when it comes to volunteers.
My top management mistake that I get very concerned about is not seeing every opportunity as an opportunity to grow your base. And so at any point in time when you're meeting with folks and gathering folks and you're planning an event, you're executing in an event, reminding ourselves that we're all organizers and taking time to say to our group, how are we going to bring more people to the next event? Who else are we going to recruit? And when we just continue to rely on the same people that show up each and every time, that's too much pressure on that smaller group of people. And you're missing out on an opportunity to grow your base, grow your skill set, grow the excitement. So always ask yourself at the end of every event, who are you bringing to the next one? Who else do you know that might want to get involved?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I always like to tell people you recruit for and from every event, right? So thinking about you try to get as many people to whatever action you're taking, whatever action is taking place, whatever you're planning for, but then you are making sure that you are also recruiting from that event. So I'm just gonna put a +1 to Sue's kind of recruitment all the time. And think outside of the box with that too. I think that sometimes we rely on 2 or 3 or 4 sort of standard tactics to find volunteers, and it requires sometimes thinking outside of the box. So always kind of be what can we try differently? What can we add to this recruitment piece? The second thing that I think I see as a sort of a pitfall is that we're not really thinking thoughtfully about what sort of activities are we engaging these volunteers in. Does this come across as busy work? Does this come across as meaningful? Is this moving the campaign along while also being respectful of their time and energy? And then lastly, kind of a third one, I would say is just that we don't spend enough time developing those leaders. And again, as Sue sort of mentioned, that you're going to have people that are going to just come in and they're going to do 1 or 2 things, and that's great. And then you're going to have other people that are going to be regulars, and you're going to have a few people that are going to demonstrate, significant commitment and skills. And are you helping them then take on additional responsibilities? Because that is going to help everybody if you can develop the leaders within your volunteer base. So those are the ones I would say.
Yeah, a lot of gold there. I think it really resonates for me. Part of this is like understanding where people are and the idea that there are all these different levels of volunteers. And to the point that Amanda was just making, that it's kind of your job to graduate people up that ladder if you can. And it's okay if you bump into folks who level out at one level, that's what they're there for. But also to always be recruiting. I think probably the biggest political story in the country right now is coming out of this New York mayoral primary that we just saw. And I was reading a little bit about that the other day. And one of the things that struck me is the size and scope of the door knocking effort that took place for candidate Mamdani. And I had read somewhere that of the 26,000 New Yorkers who signed up to volunteer for that campaign, 4,000 of them signed up because another volunteer knocked their door, and they were recruited at the door in the voter contact conversation to then go and do volunteering on their own. So like that always be recruiting mindset, I think is so powerful, and one that I know that both of you are really good at, and one that you kind of have to be good at if you want a volunteer effort that is going to scale in a meaningful way. Sue, it looked like you had something else to add.
Just very quickly, in terms of that recruitment effort, one of the things we notice is that as people list build, they list build and they put information into a database, but they don't necessarily follow up and do what you were talking about, Rob, which is then call them and say, hey, thanks so much for signing the clipboard or giving us your name. Like, want to talk more with you about why you did that and what you want to do and what your interests are. So don't just build your list, build that list is your people.
Yeah. I want to ask about how you ensure that your values in your campaign culture carry through your volunteer team, because I think a constant push and pull with volunteers, especially when you get into larger sort of volunteer infrastructure, is that balance for control between empowerment and then also managing the volunteers. So how do you get a volunteer program that reflects the culture or the values of the candidate or of the organization?
So Amanda and I talked about this and different practices that really resonated with us. And one practice that resonated with me in response to your question, Rob, was a time when we were creating, it was a co-community creation event, but there were centering principles in terms of what we were all there for. And so at every meeting, every event, every subgroup committee, we always read that vision and the mission in the first couple of years to make sure that we were so solid in it. And we still revisit them now, but not like as consistently. And so I think at any campaign event, just, you as the person running, if you have volunteer leaders leading events, just make it a standard part of the practice to remind folks, okay, who is our candidate? What do we stand for? What are the primary policy planks? What are we fighting for? Why are we running? And making sure that that's just iterated at the beginning of a canvas, at the beginning of a phone bank, at a volunteer appreciation luncheon. Just always revisit that so that it becomes part of the core culture and everybody understands why they're there.
Yeah, I guess when I think about sort of the idea of both the balance, Rob, as you said, between control and empowerment, and then how that relates to principles of your campaign, I think back to, frankly, my first organizing experience, which was the Obama '08 campaign. And I recognize that we're obviously in a nonpartisan or independent party space here. Nonetheless, like it was, respect, empower, and include. That was said at every, just like kind of what Sue mentioned, it was said at every single event, every single training, every single everything. So it got in your head, and then we saw it actually live out in practice. So things like the fact that, we took time at the end of every event to talk about how did it go, and people actually really listened about like how it went and if there were suggestions for improvement, not just in like we're checking the box, but we're actually wanting to improve how things are running. So if something came out of that conversation of like, hey, we do need to change this, then changes actually happened, which showed that we're not just saying respect, we're actually living respect, right? And we're not treating a volunteer as they're somebody less than, but as somebody that's part of the team. And so when I think about how do you kind of bridge those two things, you actually have the volunteers participate on what might seem like wow, you're giving away a lot of information or you're letting them have too much say. But I think it's really about that empowerment piece. Now, obviously, there are times that maybe a volunteer is going to suggest something that's just not, maybe it's not, you've already tested that out, it didn't work, maybe that's not feasible. And that happens, but then explain why you're not going to do it. Don't just say, that's not how we do things around here, or, that's a nice idea, but, actually have a dialogue. And that kind of thing goes a long way to showing your principles, assuming your principles are something where you're trying to empower people and include people as part of your essential campaign, principles.
Yeah, a lot of what I'm hearing from both of you is that it's better to over communicate with volunteers than under communicate. One of the poison pills, I think, is when a volunteer, feels like they're in the dark, especially when they're dedicating a lot of effort for free, right? They're doing a lot of giving to the campaign. And if they feel like that's a one-sided relationship, it makes sense that they're more likely to get burnt out or decide not to come back. So, I know that another really powerful motivator for keeping volunteers engaged is storytelling. And this is important for recruitment as well as retention, keeping people plugged into the campaign. You guys are both really talented storytellers. Can you tell me a little bit about how you use storytelling in volunteer recruitment or in retention for that matter?
I guess I think of two things come to mind immediately. First of all is the use of effective one-on-ones, right? So if I'm sitting down, having a one-on-one conversation with a volunteer or a potential volunteer, there has to be some element of what's your story? What brought you to this campaign? What are you interested in terms of a candidate? What about that candidate is speaking to you? Why do you feel like you're potentially interested in giving of your time and your effort? So storytelling has to be part of that sort of one-on-one. And then I think in a larger scale, certainly, again, effective campaigns that I've been a part of, having that story of self, us, and now as being a key element. And if you're not familiar with that, right? Like again, being able to tell your story. Why are you personally here? Why are you personally invested? But then, the story, the campaign, what's the campaign all about? And then, of course, the why now? Why is this super important now? And being able to know, first of all, why you're doing it, but know the story of the campaign. That's going to make more effective messengers when all of those volunteers go out and can talk about the campaign in a way that doesn't feel like a foreign concept. I know sometimes with volunteers, they get nervous about, I need to know all of the talking points. I need to know this candidate's every single policy piece. And if you can just remember the story of the campaign, you don't need to really worry about that because that's actually what is going to resonate with, voters as you're talking to them. So to me, that's like a really essential piece of good, sort of volunteer management is to know that story, the story of yourself and the campaign and why now.
Um, do either of you have an example of a compelling story of self, us, and now that you can sort of model for folks? I think that'd be really valuable. Not to put you on the spot.
Amanda, it has to be you.
Oh
Because
God.
I don't
Why
actually
can't
know, I know one-on-ones, but I have never actually done the story of Self, Us, and Now.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to make this brief because I know we're in a time crunch, and that's obviously a skill in and of itself, right? Is knowing how much time you have to give your story of self, and knowing that in some cases you might have to give it really fast, and at other times, you have a longer runway, so to speak. So I'll try to make it quick, but also kind of give the key points. So for those of you who are just meeting me for the very first time. I was a classroom teacher for a long, long time. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And in my state of Wisconsin in 2010, there was a big election. We had turnover, change in governor, change in state legislature. And immediately after taking office, a bill was dropped on February 11th, kind of announcing that this would fundamentally change people's ability to collectively bargain in the state, most notably for public sector employees, teachers. And this was obviously like something that a lot of my colleagues and myself were very concerned about because we wanted to have a say in how our jobs were. Frankly, mostly because we knew that our working conditions were our students' learning conditions. And if we could no longer bargain about things like how many kids are in my classroom and how many classes can I have, like it starts to affect then students' abilities to actually learn. And since that's why people were there, we wanted to do something. And so, of course, people flocked to the state capitol, right? Started to started to testify at, in the hearings around the bill, started to call state legislators, all the things you would think of um, to advocate for a defeat of this piece of legislation. And of course, it grew and grew and grew. So if you were paying attention at all to sort of news in early 2011, you probably saw some of the footage of people, occupying the Capitol and spending the night there. And some of our Democratic state senators took off to Illinois. Like this was a whole thing. And unfortunately, the bill ended up passing. So despite all of the advocacy of all of, not just me, not just my colleagues, but lots of other people from across the state who came to, make their voices heard, still passed. At that point, I had a choice. I had a choice. Do I just kind of roll over and say, okay, we tried, we failed, I accept it? Or do I now start to like get more involved and become more of an advocate and start to pay more attention to what is our state legislature doing? What laws are being passed in our state legislature? So instead of kind of going back home and digging a hole and saying, all right, that's it, I instead chose that moment in time to get more involved. And so that kind of led to sort of a plethora of then activism on my part.
Awesome. There's so much there. I love this structure because it really turns passive listeners into active participants in the story. That self piece, starts with why would Amanda care, and then she invites you to care about it with her in the us portion of this, and then gives you a sense in now of what you can actually do to be an active participant. So I'm gonna be sure to put together some resources on this storytelling method and drop that into our community and circle as a follow-up item. Another really effective way of keeping people motivated is certainly early wins and sort of like building momentum with people, making sure people have a really good first day. But what are some of the ways that you guys have utilized early wins with volunteers to set the tone for the rest of the campaign?
It's so interesting, Rob, too. And I think early wins play the role of keeping people engaged and building momentum. It's also empowering to achieve an early win, and early wins lead to like bigger wins and more extensive wins over time. And so, I think of this one example where similarly I meant where disproportionately cut also giving some of the us to get we were all in a room together on a Tuesday, having a conversation about 40 nonprofit organizations of various types, and the city school system. And what came out of that was an organizing effort. And we met, and I'm not kidding, there were about 30 nonprofits in the room. And this is the sad part. You'll appreciate how sad this is. When we said, we need to get organized and we need to build a base of power, how many people can we get into a room immediately? And among all of us, and when we were honest and not when we said, what is our real turnout number? And this gets to your question, Ruth. We had 100. We were like, we could definitely turn out 100 people. And so then the question was, do we just give up? Like, that's not enough power to go fight the governor on a $36 million budget cut. Then what we decided to do instead of giving up was to get those 100 people together, to commit to the number, bring them together and train them in organizing skills. And that is exactly what we did. And we had just about 100 people in a room. I have the photo, we'll share it. And in that session, we talked about why we were gathering. We asked people why they care about their schools. What do they want for their children? And then we all agreed that that wasn't going to happen with major budget cuts. And we asked and we trained them in organizing. We talked about who do you know that's in your network that would care about this issue too? How many people can you bring? And we broke out, there were 10 groups of 10, right? And each group had 2 organizers in it. So Ruth, when you say like, how do I build a base? Like if you have a handful of people that are with you, get them trained in how to train other people to be organizers. And then they're helping you to train other organizers, because we had a handful of organizers in our group. And a lot of us were, school staff people, like city school principals, like, community, like not organizers. But the organizers in the room taught the rest of us how to organize. And then collectively, then we organized those 100 people. The next time we got together, we had 600 people in Annapolis talking to the governor and the legislature about why it's not okay to cut city schools. Over time, we built our base of support to being able to turn out consistently over 5,000 people in Annapolis on a regular basis, along with lots of small turnout events to get people talking to their legislators, and eventually won $1 billion in new schools. But we didn't start with like being able to turn out thousands. We started with turning out 100. And that small win led to the 600. And once they turned out 600, they were like, wow, we can turn out 600 people. If we can do that, we can do more. And the next time we turned out, it was 1,000 people. And so every time we were able to bring people together, to eat together, to train together, to grow our community, to reflect together, every time we did that, we counted that as a win, celebrated that win, and acknowledged that we did that work. We reflected on how we got there, like what did we do to make that win happen? And then we said, let's do more of it, and let's do it bigger, better, and better.
Yeah, so much of my career doing field campaigns starts with looking at what you need to do on get out the vote weekend, the end of the campaign, and then building backwards from that. So taking that really big number, I need the 5,000 volunteers who are going to do 3 shifts each over a 3-day period at the end of the campaign, and saying, okay, how am I going to get there? And I know that I have 12 weeks. So on week 1, I need to get 10 people to show up and be trained. And of those 10 people, I need 5 of them to end up being volunteer leaders who are going to help me train the next group, and then have a slow escalating ramp up over the 12 weeks that you have to get towards the end of the campaign. And that's really what organizing is all about. You take the big impossible thing and you turn it into several small achievable tasks that you can do along the way. And Sue demonstrated that really perfectly. I'm going to shift us into a nice 15-minute block where we're really going to focus on volunteer recruitment, because I think that volunteer recruitment is one of the biggest common questions that I see in our community and from candidates. I see Ruth asking in the chat here, a question of scale. She's in New York City, and the campaign that had 27,000 volunteers that I recommended, that I mentioned. How does she get to 2,500 volunteers is the question. This really boils down to probably the most common question that was asked when people registered for this, which is, where do I find volunteers? And there are common answers that we've given in the past of, you start with the people who are closest to you. But for scaling up a volunteer operation, what are some of the key components of a successful volunteer recruitment strategy?
Amanda, you're inviting me to go first, I take it. The key components of a successful volunteer recruitment strategy. So I think, Rob, one of the things you said, first of all, is being really clear about how many volunteers you think you're going to need to successfully reach the number of people you need to reach in your particular district or county or city. So where you're running, you have to start with the data and look at, what are people winning by for your particular seat you're running for? What are the vote counts? What are the margins? Just to get a sense of, so if I need to do you need to door knock 40,000 people? Do you need to door knock 20,000 people? So I think going back to what Rob said, getting a really clear understanding of what number of volunteers it is to get to the number of people you need to reach to get your voters. In terms of identifying volunteers outside of your own network, I would, you always start with your network, and then from your network, asking them who else they know would be interested and supportive of your campaign. But the honest next step is the network of volunteers you've already recruited because they know you, they appreciate what you stand for and your principles, and they're already part of your campaign. You have to start reaching other people in the community, either through phone banking or door-to-door knocking or going to community events where you know a lot of people are going to be gathered. And when you're at these places and talking to people and inviting them to be part of your campaign, if somebody seems enthusiastic, you got to sign them up to volunteer in that moment, grab that person who seems really excited, and then you have to follow up with them. You don't let a lot of time pass after you've met that person, and train your volunteer recruiters, the people that are already in your campaign, on these very important same next steps. When they meet somebody who seems enthusiastic, use that as an opportunity to get to know them, find out why they're enthusiastic, and invite them to be a part of the campaign, and then follow up immediately with an ask for something for them to do. And so it really is about grassroots base building, and it's about intentionality, and then making sure that that immediate ask is happening. And that, say the immediate ask is, hey, we're having a phone bank in a couple of days. You seemed really excited the other day. You said you wanted to volunteer. Can you join us this Friday night? And they say no. Well, don't stop there. They were enthusiastic. They maybe Friday night they had dinner plans. So also make sure like you have really good volunteer recruitment scripts and training so your folks know to go, oh, wow, Friday doesn't work for you. Well, we have some other events coming up next week. Tell me more about when you might be available, or what are some of the things you might want to do. So like, let's make sure that we don't lose any of those opportunities and get those people involved. And then you build your base from there. That it grows. And then there's another level of intentionality, because now you have a new set of folks that are involved. They're doing things. Let's train them to recruit and notice when somebody's enthusiastic at the door or on the phone. And you just build and build and build from there. Definitely, when you're out and about talking in community events, when you're talking at community fairs, certainly always include an ask for volunteers. Say, hey, this is a grassroots campaign. I'm up against big money. I'm up against well-recognized names. I need help. And one of the most important ways people can help me is by volunteering for my campaign. So always make sure that that's part of your ask whenever you're talking to folks.
Yeah, this is also a great time to go back to the story of self, us, and now. Again, like it's the tiny version, right? This is the version where it's I really want to make a difference. It's why I'm running for office. And if I can get elected, I know that I can improve, issue X for my community. But I can only do that with the help of volunteers. I'm up against candidates who have more experience, more money, whatever it is. And that's why I need you to knock on doors with me, right? Like if there's the opportunity to shift back into that. Also, I love what you're saying too about following up with the person if they give you an initial no. One of my favorite questions to ask someone when trying to recruit them, if they say, "Oh, I can't do it," is just to ask, what's stopping you? What is in between this being a yes and a no? What would turn this no into a yes? And you'll have people tell you, oh, I'm just not comfortable knocking on doors. I think that, it'd be kind of scary to go to a door all by myself. And that gives you the ability to then say to the person either, oh, let's find another way for you to contribute, or to disarm that fear by explaining that they're going to go with a trainer the first time, that they're going to be able to be door knocking. So there's something really helpful in naming the obstacle and getting them to name the obstacle, so you can help them get around that obstacle or find a better fit or a better ask. Because whatever it was that, there was enough interest, that sparkle in their eye that led to you asking them to volunteer, you can find a way for them to contribute to your campaign. But if I had to boil all of this training down to just one phrase, it's always be recruiting and always say yes, right? Where ultimately, if you're in the volunteer business, you're in the business of yes. So I would love to ask you guys, about the ask. Like the ask is the most important part. How do you go about writing a recruitment ask that is sure to move someone from interested to all in for the campaign? What's your best advice?
I saw that Sue put in our resource about the hard ask, but I think that's one thing that kind of thinking back to both answer this question and also another kind of common pitfall is that I see a lot of people like, oh, are you just interested in volunteering? And then there's like this lull, right? And they're like, yeah, sure. But then like, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? And so having a very specific ask, I think then allows them to either say yes, no, or maybe. And then this is where, as you kind of just said, Rob, like you can kind of sort of, suss out why they might say no or why there might be trepidation. And then so making sure that I'm very, very specific about my ask. And then, of course, as Sue said, having alternates. But then I also like to think of sort of sometimes, if at all possible, having sort of a third bucket, which is that how do I sometimes get them to do the thing that they're scared of in a way that doesn't seem so scary? So, sometimes it's like, okay, this person, and this is a little bit about reading people. I think that's an important, thing to note when you're working with people as an organizer that you're paying attention. What is the body language? What is this person actually saying to me? So sometimes it's like, hey, can you bring some water to the canvas? And then they start to hear the canvassers come back and talk about how amazing their experience was. Oh, that doesn't seem so scary. These people all had a good time. Like I'm hearing that. Sometimes it's, hey, can you drive a couple of canvassers? And again, just baby steps to get them. Could you help carry lit? You don't have to talk, but can you help carry literature, right? Ways to get people to do the thing without them even recognizing that they're starting to do the thing. So giving them, all of that sort of support, and of course, like it goes without saying, but training. And by training, I mean like not just talking at people, but I'm a big believer in like, let's practice, let's role play. So kind of like Rob, when you put me on the spot of like, can you tell your story of self? Like you have to be ready to be as somebody asking that, asking volunteers to do something, you have to be ready to be vulnerable and show what are you asking them to do. So to just kind of summarize the hard ask, like something really specific, have alternatives, and if they seem like you can that well maybe we could get them there, then finding a way to like provide them the necessary training and baby steps to get there and being willing to be vulnerable and show it yourself.
Awesome. Another sort of question that I've seen pop up a bunch over the last couple of weeks are what social platforms or in-person spaces are best for recruiting, especially for local, smaller campaigns. I even want to frame this as what are some of those spaces that you two think are underutilized on campaigns?
I think this is a hard question to ask because I think this is where you have to really, as a candidate or someone working on a campaign, you have to know that area. Because what I might find as like, yeah, this is underutilized in Madison, Wisconsin might be very different than like Sue is experiencing in Baltimore. So I would sort of make sure you sort of know the area, the territory. Like I can tell you here, people use that next door like message board or app or whatever, like all the time. And I rarely see that used by candidates and campaigns. And I'm like, why? That's where like so many people are. Why are we not doing that? So recognizing what is something that's popular in your area and it might be different from any other area. So just kind of paying attention to that. And also I would also say make sure like even though that's what I see, maybe if I went and asked an 18-year-old, they would tell me something totally different. What if I asked my 80-year-old mother? Would she tell me something different? So I'm also like going to seek out the advice of, a whole swath of people of different ages and where they're coming from, making sure I'm hitting different regions of a location so that maybe what I'm seeing isn't just everything, but what are they seeing? Where are they getting their information? And then making sure I'm hitting it, even if that's not something I'm as familiar with.
Yeah, so I see a couple of questions in the chat here. Ruth said, "Can you use Nextdoor to recruit volunteers for a political effort? Is it allowed?" I've seen it done really effectively. There was a candidate last year with goodparty.org who they had an extremely limited budget and they couldn't afford any sort of texting or paid communications. But what they did do is they went into Nextdoor and they manually messaged every single person in their neighborhood saying, I'm going to be at this coffee shop from these hours, and I want to hear from you. I want to hear what are your top issues. And they got the majority of their volunteers from people coming to in-person coffee meetings that all started with them announcing it and inviting it on Nextdoor. So to Amanda's point, there's the difference on are there people using that app where you are or not. I think, in where I am in rural Windham, Maine, it would be totally different than where I just moved from in Portland, Maine, even though it's only about 20 minutes away. And so it can be a big cultural difference just depending on where you are. I also see a little bit of a conversation going on about how door knocking has become more difficult with Ring cameras, and Kimberly pushing back on that a little bit, saying that you can actually talk to someone through the Ring camera, just like you were. And I know that that's been something that we've seen with different effects for different people. So I think as stuff like Ring cameras and all of this begins to pop up, door knocking will still be an effective method for reaching out to people. You just have to be persistent, as with most things. Moving back into talking a little bit about volunteer recruitment, for our candidates, let's say that they're starting with a modest social media following. They don't have much of an email list. They're running for a local city council race, and they have their 200 friends on Instagram. Where would you start with these folks? What advice do you have?
In terms of building your social media presence, I think that's an interesting question, Rob, and I wish Edel were here because he's
Oh, actually, I want to clarify. How would you utilize that existing social media presence to help you get volunteers?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the clarity. These existing, well, that's so interesting, Rob, because that's the virtual space versus like the in-person space. And then the goal is to turn your virtual followers into active people who are actively engaged. And to me, I think that would be about differentiating, offering them different kinds of opportunities to get involved. And if these are folks that already like to get online and they already like to do socials, thinking about whether or not you could invite them to be part of like a meme team or a social reshare team, or invite them to scour social boards on your behalf to post information about your campaign in the appropriate communities. But so like meet them where they're at and ask, and then explore how they can leverage the fact that they enjoy being in social media, and ask them like, hey, I need to help get my campaign out there, and would you be willing, as people who like to engage on social media, to help share information on Instagram, help post information about events I have coming up on your Facebook page or your Blue Sky page, or whatever medium people are in. But I think the other thing is then to even have online events. Like, not every volunteer engagement event has to be an in-person event. You can have volunteer engagement events that are online, where you can invite people to meet you online and have actions for them to do. Phone banking, so everybody's together online at an event. You can have some community building time and then turn to phone banking, or talk about planning house parties, or ask them, what they're interested in doing and giving them options, and get to know them and then go from there. But I think that if they're in a virtual space, meet them in the virtual space and then see where you can move them.
One thing that I recommend everyone does when they start a campaign, and I think that it's not too late to do this if you haven't done it, is to grab your phone and just take a very straight to camera video where you say, I'm doing something that I've always really wanted to do. I'm following a passion and I'm running for office. And I'm sending this to you because you're one of my followers. I'm sending this to you because you're one of the contacts in my phone, and I'm sending it to literally everyone that I know, my mom, my dad, my best friend, and people who I've only talked to once. And I'm doing it because I want to invite you to support me in this effort. And if you can make a small donation, that's great. But the best thing that you can do is volunteer for my campaign and then point them towards your website where you have even a basic Google form that they can fill out to be able to sign up and show interest. And then you follow up with that person. I instruct every single candidate that I work with to do a version of that and always have on the first day that they have their website live because it's a great way to invite people in. And I think that that is something, again, if you're, a week away from your election happening and you haven't done something like that, now's the time to do it. Use the urgency of I'm 1 week out from this election and I need to contact as many voters as possible. So, yeah. Um, so another really common situation that I think people bump into when they're recruiting volunteers is you meet the person who says, I'm actually too busy to help. What are some micro volunteer tasks that you might pivot to with this person because a good organizer just doesn't have no in their vocabulary?
I mean, my favorite with that one is, can you bring some supplies to the staging location? And again, funny enough, like a lot of times those people, anyway, but be strategic about when you're asking them to do it so that they're seeing that there's a lot of activity and that there's fun and that people actually are, have friendships and relationships. One of the phrases that anybody that spends any time with me talking about volunteers knows that I say, they come for the candidate or the cause, but they stay for the relationships. And so if people see that, it's funny enough, sometimes they stick around and have conversations. And then when people say, or you come into the next whatever, then like, oh, I don't know. And, it starts to at least put it in their head that maybe they could. So I'm always a big proponent for like drop off supplies, as kind of a way in. But then also like, I think about the like, any of the sort of office work, right? Stuffing envelopes, writing postcards, you know, things like that are, but I always try to encourage them even then to like still come and be in community. Because that's a way that sometimes you can get people to, move from those more solitary activities to being more sort of direct voter contact.
So I think just with Amanda's suggestion, to me, what is important is being prepared in advance with what those micro activities are that folks can do from the comfort of their home so that you're always prepared to put that next option on the table. And the other thing I was thinking about, Amanda, as you talked about that, is the importance of being organized in order to recruit volunteers. And so I remember working with a senator who was running for office, and we were building yard signs in her campaign office. And with tape and hammers and nails and a whole host of things to make this work, because it was just difficult for some strange reason. It was very hard to build these yard signs. But that was a moment of disorganization. And thankfully, the volunteers that happened to be there that day were very dedicated and problem solving with us to figure it out. But what we should have done and been prepared for is having tried this a couple of times on our own and recognizing what it was going to take to actually build these things and then have the appropriate infrastructure in place. So when you have your little micro tasks, say they're writing postcards from home, make sure you have postcards and stamps to give to the person to write from home if they say yes. If you want them to phone bank 10 people from home or call 20 people from home, have that ready to go. So whatever those micro tasks are, be prepared and organized and have them available to give to people to do.
If I can add
Um,
just one other thing, just to what Sue was saying that I think is important to just recognize, and this comes with not just time, but in general, but like making sure that it's accessible to the volunteer. I think we need to recognize that volunteers come not just with every skill, but every ability and every and interest. And so making sure that what are the various tasks that you're asking them to do is something that they can do. So I'm not going to have, my 80-year-old mother go knock on 50 doors, but I certainly might give her some postcards to write, right? So like also knowing who your volunteers are and making sure that your asks meets them where they are at.
yeah, definitely matching the volunteer for the task at hand. Definitely. I want to talk a little bit about volunteer onboarding and training. Um, like to your point, you want to set volunteers up for success by matching them with the right tasks, but also giving them the training that they need to succeed, especially if they're doing something for the first time. Um, what have you guys included in a volunteer welcome message or welcome kit, both that represent us and in roles that you've had in the past?
I mean, honestly, like a booklet worth of information. I think to your point earlier, Rob, over communicating is the best way to go. And so when I have worked with volunteers in the past and onboarding volunteers, we have and we have it at Robust. Like we have material that explains, who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, perhaps some articles that help to speak to why this is a major issue, and then information about events we have coming up, but then also in the booklet, anything we train on. If we're training on one-on-ones, then there's a one pager in there about one-on-ones. If we're training about our talking points, if we have our Canvas protocols and how-tos, all of that is printed out and in the booklet as a reference guide for folks. I usually create space for people to be able to take notes. And then you can always follow up with electronic copies as well. But I'm a true believer in the tangibles and how much of a difference it makes for people to be able to hold something, interact with it, take notes on it, and have it to refer to later. I think it just really helps you to make sure that your message is being heard. And as we know, folks learn in lots of different ways: reading, visual, verbal. And so by having your booklet, and especially if you include visuals and written word, and you have an in-person training or a virtual training, then you're hitting all the different ways in which people learn and ensuring they're having like a fully engaged experience.
Mhm.
I'll add on to that, just made a couple things that may seem silly, but like I want to make sure I'm thanking them like a lot. Like, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for giving of your giving your effort. Thank you for being here. And I say it 10 times and then I remind myself I should say it 10 more times, right? So I think just first of all, that's got to be part of any sort of welcome. And then I think it goes back to that story of, self, us, and now in terms of like, we can't do it without you. So I always like to give like not just like, here's what we're up against and here's how you're going to help, but here's also what all of the amazing volunteers have done so far so that a brand new volunteer is like, wow, I'm part of something that's like super amazing. And like, look at what's being done. I can't tell you how much that like excites people who have just walked into a space to know that they're part of this amazing cohort of individuals working to get a candidate elected. That feels really great for volunteers. And then again, like as Sue said, I love the tangibles as well. And I'm a big role play person. Taking the time, even I like to say sometimes you go slow to go fast. That even if, I know like, oh, maybe we're not going to get to 5 more doors, but if they have a better experience because they've been trained and their questions have been answered and they've practiced what it might look like, and then they have a better experience, then they're more likely to come back. And so even if they're not getting, maybe they're only doing 40 doors instead of 50, but then they come back and do 3 more canvases. Well, guess what? Then it's, you've got a whole bunch, like almost 200 doors. Whereas if they have 50 doors, but it's a terrible experience, so be also being mindful of what their experience is like. And then likewise, I want to hear at the end, how did it go? And again, really being thoughtful about what they're saying rather than just like check in the box. Like we did a debrief. Cool. but actually like engaging with them and hearing all of the voices from the people that have participated.
Awesome. So I am looking at the time here, and I know that this is probably the last question that we'll be able to ask Sue. Amanda's going to stick with us all the way through the end of the training. But Sue, I did want to give you the chance to offer up kind of a final thought, but also to answer a question that I know you're really good at, which is you mentioned the importance of being able to move people up the volunteer ladder. How do you know when someone's ready to take more responsibility? And how do you approach that conversation about inviting someone to take a bigger piece of the campaign as a volunteer?
I agree, Rob. It's actually really exciting, I think, to help to develop people and encourage them to take on greater roles of leadership and see their joy as they realize that they have the capacity and power to take on additional responsibility. So the intentionality begins with having really clear and distinct ideas as a campaign about what leadership development looks like for you. And having built into your campaign opportunities for leadership development. And so I think Amanda's going to share a tool, a resource that we have that we created at RepUs that we're still getting feedback on as we iterate. But we thought about our own approach. And so the way we look at it at RepUs is, we have lots of events where people can come and volunteer and get engaged. And we have leaders that attend those events as well as staff. And so when we're at those events, we're looking to notice who's a person that shows up pretty regularly for a phone bank or a text bank or a letter to the editor event or a socials event. And then of those people that are showing up really consistently, who seems to like offer up help to other people or who is just really enthusiastic. So we're really intentional about leadership recruitment because when you recruit somebody into your leadership team, you're inviting them to take on more responsibility on your behalf and perhaps even showing up in places where you're not going to be and being a voice and a representative of your campaign. So enthusiasm by itself is not necessarily a leader. That's just somebody that's enthusiastic. You need to have really clear ideas about what you think leader principles could be, such as consistency, kindness, an aptitude to be able to help others. So you got to have some set of ideas and principles around which you're looking for leaders, and then only recruiting people that hit like most of those marks. So it's an interesting conundrum because you want as many leaders as you can recruit, and at the same time, they have to have the capacity to represent you in your campaign and support others and recruit others and take on this additional level of responsibility. And you can have a midway point. Like you could give somebody who seems like they could be a leader some smaller jobs where they're helping out a little bit more, doing a little bit more elevated work, but you're not jumping them all the way to leadership, and you're giving them an opportunity to show their aptitude and to give them some skill building in these smaller jobs with the idea that maybe this person could be a future leader. So there's some people that are going to show up. And the other thing I'll just add about leadership is leaders are people who other people follow. So part of what you're looking for in your events and other places that you engage is, are there people that are showing up and volunteering that other people are starting to go to ask for help? So they're already demonstrating a level of trust in your community just by the way other people are engaging with them. So there's layers to it. We have a resource for you, so that helps. And I just, again, like anything else, intentionality. And I'm so sorry. So I'm actually doing some organizing work tonight. And one of the things that's really central to organizing is sustaining relationships and building relationships and making sure that you're checking in with people and not letting those relationships lapse. So I'm going to go do that. And I look forward to seeing you all on your campaign trails.
We'll see you soon, Sue. Amanda and I are going to stick with it, and we are going to talk a little bit more about volunteer management. Amanda, I wanted to know what are some of the tools that you use, spreadsheets, apps, et cetera, when it comes to tracking who did what and when.
Yeah.
This is something that our folks are always looking for more help with.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say in my experience, it really depends on how big your campaign is. If you're doing some real small, maybe you can just kind of deal with it on a spreadsheet. And of course, this is where it's really important that you are not doing it yourself. So please train other people to monitor. So typically, like if I'm thinking about if you're running canvases and let's say you're doing 2 or 3 canvases in different locations, you're having a canvas lead and they're going to put in the data at the end, right? Then that's like part of the job. So it's not just you running it. But of course, like obviously I've, been through big campaigns where you're using, it's something like a van or some other sort of CRM to track. But I think it's making sure that it is consistent. The key isn't so much what tool, although obviously everybody's going to have a preference, but and what that tool can handle in terms of like size. But it's just making sure that it's like part of a consistent practice. Because that's really the key. Because you do want to track who's coming, who's been talking to whom, all of that good stuff. Because all of those little things make a huge difference, both from the voter's perspective, but then also from the volunteer. Um,
Yeah. And how often do you check in with your team and with your volunteers? What's sort of good
yeah.
best practice for that? And what does it look like to check in with volunteers?
Yeah, so this is where I think it's important to sort of recognize that you need to evaluate your kind of what's your system look like. So if I'm working with a bunch of teams, for example, I need to evaluate where are those teams at. Not every team is going to be, maybe they even developed at the exact same time. Maybe they got started all in, June of 2025. But yet this team has, great guns. It's, really pretty self-sufficient and this other team, though, oof, like unless you are hand holding, they're kind of a mess. So obviously, the team that's a little bit more of a mess is first of all going to probably need some better training, some better resources, some better supports, maybe taking it back to the basics. So that team, I might be checking in fairly regularly. And the other team, maybe it's just a once a month, like, how's it going? Is there anything you need kind of thing? So I think it depends. But what I would say is that you're constantly evaluating how are your teams doing? How are your volunteers doing? And I would say in terms of volunteer like leadership, like I think there's a tendency to be like, I don't need to check in with those leaders because they're good, they're like tuned in. And yet I would argue that if you lose them, you lose so much. So I would still check in with them just to make sure that they're they're doing okay and B, that they're not doing what is another common pitfall in which they start doing everything. That's one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have whatever your leaders are, whoever they are, you don't want them to take on everything. So you want to make sure that even in a team that seems to be good, is it developing new leaders? What is that process like for them? How is the person that was kind of taking the lead? How are they doing? Do they need anything? So I think, at least once a month for a pretty self-sufficient, team leader teams, but then definitely a lot more if they need it. And hopefully, the team that needs the more frequent check-ins, hopefully they kind of recognize that and are sort of asking for supports too. That's part of, I think, the process that you want your volunteers to also start to evaluate. How are we doing? What do we need?
Yep.
I think that's when like you're in a really good stage is when people are sort of recognizing what's going well for them and where they might need a little bit of extra support.
So that's some of what's going well. I want to talk about one of the hard things about working with volunteers, and that's where you get into issues of commitment or sometimes even conflict. Um, there's a scenario where a volunteer no-shows for 3 shifts in a row. How would
Yeah.
you handle something like that?
Yeah, so I guess the first step is I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'm thinking about the volunteer themselves, but then I'm also thinking about systems because I want to make sure that this is person specific rather than a system specific problem. So, for example, are we doing confirmation calls, which we haven't talked about, or confirmation of some sort? It doesn't have to be a phone call. Are we making sure that we have reached out to this person who says, yes, I'm going to come to X, Y, or Z event. Are you making sure that they have the information? Are you making sure that you're reminding them? Because all of those personalized, kind of checks or reminders makes a big difference as to whether or not people are going to come. A lot of times people, they sign up, it sounds good, and then, gets busy or, the day of the event, something else comes up or the weather is not great or they're tired or whatever. And if they've had that personalized, like, hey, we're looking forward to seeing you, making sure you have all the info, like it makes it a lot harder for them to sort of say, oh, I'm just gonna get an extra hour of sleep as opposed to going to that phone bank. So that is one thing is I want to make sure that we're actually following up on are we doing the thing that we should be doing? Then for the person, again, this is where it's helpful if you have a relationship with your volunteers. If you're not just looking at them as, a name, a number, how many times they volunteered or how many voters they've talked to or what have you, that you actually know a little bit about them so that when you do reach out, and obviously I recommend reaching out to them, you're having a conversation of like, hey, I'm wanted to check in and see how X, Y, or Z is going. Maybe you know that there's something already going on in their life, and you can use that sort of opportunity to reconnect with them, to show that you care, and they're going to be way more likely to come back. Maybe there is a really good reason that they haven't. And even if there's not, just the fact that you've checked in a really kind of compassionate and, coming in with your humanity first, really I think helps to bring people back to the fold. And maybe you're going to find out that maybe there's a problem with the campaign or with, amongst the volunteers. Maybe there's something that has made this person feel um, not welcome or feel unsafe to be there. And that then it's like a larger problem that you're going to have to deal with. So I would check your systems, check in with the person, kind of lead with your humanity, lead with what you know about the person, and then try to address what is the root cause of the no-show behavior.
Yeah. So a lot of good learnings there for when things are going wrong. The flip side is, of course, when things are going right, what does recognition look like for a volunteer beyond, your standard thank you or pat on the back?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like this may seem like an obvious thing, but when you're running a campaign to try to get elected to office, by all means, please invite people to your victory party or to your like we worked really hard party. I know that sounds silly, but like, you know, I've literally seen where people have been like, only the select few get to come. No, no, that's not, it's the opposite. It should be your volunteers are kind of the first people you think about including. Um, I also sort of give them an opportunity to, share with the candidate, or if I was campaign managing, like, what do you think? Sometimes in a way that goes beyond a debrief, which may sound like, how is that recognition? You're just letting them share what they think. But the fact that like they think like, oh, I might have an in to tell somebody how to do that, like that feels really, really kind of exciting. And then I think about, all of the potentially tangible things. So, can you acknowledge your major volunteers at your victory party? Can you do a slideshow where you show your volunteers in action and look at what this team's accomplished and look at what that team's accomplished. All of that, gives, big kind of pats on the back. Are you making sure that they've got swag, that they're walking around not just obviously you're advertising, your campaign, but at the same time, like you're also showing like this person matters, that we want you to represent the campaign in a way that feels like again that they're part of something. So all of those things, I think, usually usually help to sort of make people feel good about being a part of it. And again, if you're building in sort of that community piece, they also feel good about being there because they've found, I mean, I can think of all these people that I have in my life because we worked on a campaign together that like I wouldn't have had. I would have never met them. And I can't imagine my life without them. So making sure that I'm providing opportunities to like be social together and have fun together. I think all of that is sort of not just recognition, but also just providing sort of a reinforcing environment that makes people want to keep coming back over and over again.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give us a little bit of a pause here. I'm going to invite Tevin in a moment to pull into the product demo portion of the call. While we're doing that, I invite people. I see some questions and some conversation I'm going to pull from the chat. We're going to do 15 minutes of Q&A on the other side of the product demo with Amanda. But just as a reminder, you can use the Q&A function to submit in a sort of a listed format of questions that we'll go over at the end. So now's the perfect time to ask that burning question that you guys might have, and we'll get to those in the back half of the call. But Tevin, why don't you introduce yourself? And Tevin's going to walk you through a couple of tools that you can use with your volunteer recruitment efforts.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Tevin. I'm one of the product managers here at goodparty.org. So I'm in charge of taking a look at a lot of the different things our candidates need, talking to them about how to solve those problems, and then building out the product to make sure that it works well for you all. So I've got a few different things I'll demo here, some around making asks for getting people to volunteer, some around tracking like we've talked about, and then I'll finish off with a couple of different ways that you can use some of our tools to help you do some of the volunteer management and some of the creativity of getting people into different jobs and doing different things if they're not people who really want to be door knocking or phone banking. So I'll start us off here in our AI assistant. So for anybody who's not aware, whenever you sign up, this is a free tool that you can use, unlimited usage. We don't cap you or anything. So you can see here that I've started to ask it like, hey, I need some talking points and coaching on how I can turn some of my donors into volunteers. So here, in this particular case, I really need people to help me knock some doors on the weekend, and I'd like a 4-hour shift out of them. And so asked it that, and it gives me a pretty decent response here. So we start by acknowledging their support, really get into what the next steps here are, highlighting the value of their time, giving the ask, emphasizing the impact. And then it gives me a little bit of coaching and links me to some resources that we've got. So I guess the sort of general point to take away from this is that you can ask almost any question. The advantage of a lot of these modern AI systems is that you can ask almost anything, and you're guaranteed to get something back. If you ask it something crazy, you'll get something crazy back. But in terms of the information that we've got hooked up into this chatbot, a lot of the different resources that we have at show, you are going to be well taken care of in terms of getting all of your campaign and volunteer and different questions around your race answered. So I thought this was a good spot to start. I'll hop over into like getting recording your voter contacts. So like we talked about here, having a system to manage when people have actually gone and done something. Let's say you've had you and a couple of volunteers, you've gone out for 4 hours and you've knocked 150 doors. So you're definitely going to want to come here and say that you went and knocked 150 doors. We put voter contacts here as kind of the main focal point of our product for a reason, and that is that voter contact and actually going out and talking to these people and recruiting volunteers to go talk to more people is the best way for you to win a campaign. So I'd say definitely keep this updated. And as you go throughout your campaign, you see here, I've got a campaign for this particular account that's in November. So we're pretty far ahead here. But as you get closer, 8 weeks, 7 weeks to your campaign, you'll see that your task list will change, and it'll tell you to do a lot of these different voter contact efforts. It'll say, hey, this week you probably want to go knock on some doors, or you might want to send a text out. And that's a great indicator to you that, hey, if I've got some people who are engaged and I want to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing, maybe I'll get them scheduled for some door knocking. And I've got a couple small ones, Rob. I'll be really quick. I promise that we've got time for. I know we've got a lot of questions today. Um, so the big point here is, let's say I've got a volunteer that doesn't want to knock doors or text or do phone banking, and I don't really know what to do with them. I know they're enthusiastic and I know what they want to help. All I have to do is put what I know about them. Maybe they plan a great party. Maybe they're, in this case, organized as a person. It's got some great ideas here for how to take somebody who's organized. Maybe there's somebody who'll maintain some of our data. Maybe they'll coordinate an event, or if there's somebody who plans a really great party, they might make a great event organizer. So you can use this to creatively solve some of the problems if you've got people who are enthusiastic about your campaign, but not particularly about the things that you're asking them to do. You can come here and be prepared with some other asks that are personalized to them and their strengths, and make sure that you've got them doing what they're most effective at. Okay. I think that hopefully leaves enough time, Rob, for our Q&A. I know we're pretty packed.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Not a problem.
The first question, this one comes from Eric Bronner in Missouri. Eric says, when it comes to large-scale volunteer recruitment, what method has the best ROI? Digital ads, events, etc. And there's probably data behind like the hard and fast answer for this. I'll share my take and then I'll let Amanda tap in on it. I have found that for volunteer recruitment, you need the warmest possible form of voter contact. So text messaging, for example, and even digital ads, I've not found to be particularly effective for volunteer recruitment. Instead, it has to be something warm. I mentioned at the top of the call in that New York City race that 4,000 volunteers showed up and knocked doors for candidate Mondani because someone knocked on their door. That person-to-person connection is what leads to people deciding to volunteer. So I think early in a campaign, this is where house parties can be really valuable. You kind of get that endorsement effect, that halo effect from someone inviting their network to their house because they care about you. You start with your best friend and get them to invite their 10 best friends or 20 best friends over. And then you try to get as many of those people as possible onto your volunteer list. And you do a series of those house parties early on in the campaign to be able to build out a strong volunteer base. And then you get referral after referral after referral. I think social media also can be a form of this warmer contact. I think this is, again, very topical with the Mamdani campaign. But I think a lot was made of his ability to have viral moments, but I think his talent as a communicator ultimately fed that massive door knocking machine that he built. And so your ability to connect with people and feel like a friend to them and have their friends sharing your content like that, it has to be the warmest form of reaching someone to be able to get them to volunteer for you. That's my take. What about you, Amanda? What do you think is the highest ROI for recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, I completely like plus 1,000 to all of that. I mean, I certainly think about, sometimes, okay, I want to get the biggest number of people in the door. Then you have to have some sort of major attraction. That's sometimes hard to do when you're just like starting out or what kind of connections you might have. So if you can get somebody amazing in the door, whether it's an entertainer or another politician or something, you might get them in the door. However, that is only going to get them in the door. That's not necessarily going to get them to recruit or to sign up to volunteer. So then you need still that personal touch. And that's where I think, Rob's mentioning like you're texting your 10 friends and then they come, that relational piece is super huge. So the only way that really to me, like even if you're getting a bunch of people in the door, if you're not doing something to tap into that relational piece, it's probably not gonna, it's gonna be like, oh, I got 100 people in the door, but it's not gonna necessarily result in the biggest number of volunteers unless you do something in addition to, again, make it so it seems personal. And again, anytime you can have a one-on-one touch with potential volunteers, that's going to go a lot further.
So a vet says my volunteers are aging out. What recommendations do you have? I would start with finding a way to use the volunteers that you do have. There's no such thing as aging out as far as I'm concerned. Amanda made a great point of like, probably don't ask my 80-year-old grandmother to go and knock 100 doors, but you can find a meaningful role for that population. But in terms of if your volunteers are getting a little bit older, what can you do to find new young volunteers to join a campaign?
Yeah, I would say I always think back to I was running a campaign and it was a municipal campaign, a school board election, and it was of course like dead of winter. My 80-some-year-old father is like, I want to help out. And of course, like I'm not having my 80-some-year-old father out there walking. But he sat at the staging location so that there would always be a friendly person when people came back to drop off supplies or to get more supplies. And that was like, that sounds like, oh, it wasn't much, but it was a lot because it was, again, that personal touch that kept people going. So I think about things like that, or, like I've had some people be great, what we call, sort of your comfort captains of like, greeting people when they walk in the door, making sure they have, hot soup in the winter and, ice cold lemonade in the summer, right? Like those little touches make a big difference. And then, yeah, as a former high school teacher, I always think about like, can I come talk to high school classes about how kids can get involved? Can I go talk to college classes about how college age kids can get involved, right? I mean, that's particularly helpful when you're running a nonpartisan race, because then it's just like getting involved in general. And it's not, partisan specific. So I think about doing, kind of what Rob said, both directions of like, how do I keep people involved at any age and then find new people? The other thing that I've kind of done sometimes that has worked really well is mentoring. So if I have a really strong volunteer who is starting to, the sun is setting in terms of how much time they're going to be committed to it. They want to still do the work, but they just can't give as much time. They are getting older. There's other things that they've got to take care of. I ask them to mentor a brand new volunteer who has has some leadership sort of characteristics and capability. It's a really great way to like recognize how awesome your older volunteer is. And at the same time, giving the new volunteer somebody that they can ask questions to that's not you or that's not another organizer. And that sometimes feels really good for the new volunteer too, because they can ask like, is this normal? Is this what kind of things have you done? What has your experience been? So to me, that's kind of a win-win as well, to try to use that also as a way to develop new leaders.
So I see a question from Steve Hayes here about what's a good rule for the number of volunteers needed. And he gives the specific example of first for getting petitions to get onto the ballot, and then second for your door knocking goals, and gives the example that his race would take about 15,000 votes to win. When you're looking to scope a volunteer operation, Amanda, where do you start?
I start to think about, again, I think we mentioned this earlier, is that working backwards model. So, right.
Mhm.
So if I need to get X number of votes, how many conversations do you think I'm going to need to have? And of course, in recognizing canvassing or phone banking is not conversation, right? So knowing that, maybe on average, I'm going to get 30 on a good day, I'm going to get 30% of the doors that I knock on is going to actually result in a conversation, right? So you sort of like work backwards of like, all right, how many doors am I going to need to knock? How many conversations am I going to need to have? Obviously, that's not going to be the only way you're going to get votes, right? You're going to get votes through all sorts of different ways. Go to forums, filling out questionnaires, whatever mailers you're putting out, et cetera, and so forth. But I've always worked backwards in terms of trying to think about, how many of those conversations am I going to need to have? And then how many am I going to need to, how many volunteers am I going to need? And then, of course, going from there. Um, and recognize the fact. I mean, this is what one thing is that recognizing the fact that if things are going really well and you're getting a lot of volunteers, have a means of also like scaling up. Don't just hit the minimum. So make sure you have also a plan where like I'm getting more volunteers. What do I do to expand my list, so to speak? And I don't mean go to the same door an additional time. That's not to say you don't hit doors more than once, but like, are there other doors that I didn't even try to get to that maybe I should think about? And then vice versa. What happens if I don't know, like I'm gonna had a string of horrible weather. It's, the weekend before the election, and now I've just sort of scaled back. How do what are the priorities to still get to by doors? And then what is another way that I could get to those voters that maybe require some other, voter contact method? So thinking about all of those contingencies and have them well thought out and built into your plan, I think is the best way to go.
Yeah, I dropped a sort of written version of a lot of what Amanda said, Steve, as a response to the question that you asked. And the only thing that I would add is that I like to calculate the number of volunteer shifts rather than the number of volunteers. And this is a dynamic that I like because sometimes you get 5 volunteers who are going to volunteer, every single day over the course of a campaign. I give the example here of a one volunteer who's going to volunteer for you 3 times, right? If you have that, they're going to collect for you 300 signatures versus needing 3 volunteers to volunteer for you 1 time to equal that same output. So that's just another variable to consider. The more dedicated a volunteer is, the more sort of lift they're able to give to your campaign. I'm looking at the list of questions here, and I see there was an ongoing sort of conversation that Lupe kicked off about moles and spies and subterfuge on campaigns, and curious about the best way to identify a spy posing as a volunteer. I'll start by saying that this happens pretty rarely, but it does happen, right? It does happen that a campaign will be infiltrated by an opponent, but it does happen. And I think that there are some systems that you can have in place. I think that there are some good comments in the chat about the importance of having people working in pairs. That's important, not just to find, bad actors, but also to make sure that people are staying on message, especially door knocking or any sort of campaigning where someone is speaking on behalf of the campaign. It's useful for there to be someone there who can say, "Oh, I don't think that's actually how the candidate would say it," and that prevents some pieces. But Amanda, in the past, when you've worked on campaigns, how have you spotted bad actors or people who have infiltrated from campaigns?
I mean, yes, thankfully it's been very, very rare. I kind of was chuckling because I was sort of thinking about like, oh, like you kind of you provide a little test sometimes if you really are suspicious. I mean, this is, are you willing to go out and knock doors and it's 45 degrees and raining? Then, you're probably not an infiltration from the other campaign. Things like that. So it's like you kind of see whether or not they're like, what is their behavior actually like? And then yeah, like sometimes I think having those conversations of like, it's a reminder sometimes of let's revisit why we're supporting this candidate. And sometimes having those conversations like amongst the whole group, so you don't, if you're like, oh, I'm not sure, like that sometimes has been helpful too, to then like, do they have to think about it? Does it seem painful? And then sometimes having those conversations one-on-one, like, hey, people are a little concerned here. I want to just kind of dive a little bit deeper, like what's bringing you here? And a lot of times if there's something nefarious, then a lot of times they'll kind of own up to it at that point.
I will own up to I once was a campaign mole. I was working on a campaign in South Dakota, and it was a Halloween night, and the opponent's campaign had a phone bank-a-thon where they had all you could eat wings, and I showed up dressed as Macho Man Randy Savage and only ate chicken wings. And I ate as many chicken wings as any man ever has and didn't make a single phone call. And it was one of the best paid days of my life. So that's uh, tales and proof that unfortunately this does happen, and even the best of us at times have done it. A question from Michael. Michael's a volunteer, and Michael says that he has been looking for candidates to work for, but is actually struggling to find candidates near him to help and who have things for him. Do you have any advice on the volunteer side of the equation on how to find candidates that they can volunteer for, or even how to approach a candidate to make the most of your skills as a volunteer?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, the first thing I would suggest is just looking at, again, sort of their website, their social media. Are they actually advertising events and like specifying what you're going to do? And a lot of times I would also look to see that there's like a whole calendar of events, not just one and done, because you want to know that they're like really being thoughtful with whatever events that they are planning. So that's A, number one. And then B, I mean, certainly calling them up and saying like, hey, this is my strengths, these are my interests. I'd love to help you out. How can we do it? And a good campaign is going to, first of all, jump on the opportunity to like, oof. And, usually, again, if they're solid, they're going to set up some sort of one-on-one so they can talk with you and find out a little bit more about what is your story and why might you be interested in helping this campaign. So those are some of the things that I would look for. Are they active? Do they have a full events calendar? And then reaching out, and again, if you could do it at an event, that's even better. But making sure they actually like, when's your plan to follow through? Sometimes I've had that where like they're busy, and so it's like I can expect a return phone call, or we can set something up by Monday. Giving them also a sort of a deadline is helpful too.
Awesome. Well, we are a couple minutes over time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you for sticking with us a few extra minutes, Amanda. I want to invite everyone to join us on Circle. That's our online community of over 1,000 candidates and volunteers. Kennedy's going to drop a link for everyone to join Circle. We have free courses for candidates on how to run for office, free courses for volunteers on how to maximize their skill set, and even free courses for elected officials to make sure that they're getting the most out of their time as they get into office. And also in 2 weeks, we have another one of these trainings that's focused on how to leverage voter data. One of the main offerings that we have at goodparty.org is voter data, and we'll teach you how to use it to power your voter contact campaigns. So if you'd like to RSVP for that event, I just dropped the link there. And again, that'll be in 2 weeks. And join us in Circle, where you can ask questions ahead of time. That's where we got some of the questions for this training, as well as stay in touch in between these trainings with fellow candidates, people who are making their way through. We recently did a kind of fun little audit, and of the candidates in Circle who have had elections so far this year, 71% of them have won their elections, which is over our regular average for goodparty.org candidates. So there's something kind of cool happening with those candidates who are talking with each other on an ongoing basis and problem solving together. And we invite you into that conversation that's happening there. I am going to definitely follow up by posting some additional resources on the tools that Amanda and that Sue shared here. I'm going to share some of their assets that they shared from Represent Us, including that leadership rubric that they shared. And also I can feel a post coming on about the story of self, us, and now to really walk people through how to use that. So again, thank you to Amanda, thank you to Sue, thank you to Represent Us for being such good partners, and for all of their work. We didn't talk much about Represent Us's mission, but they're the largest anti-corruption organization in the country, and they're doing really important work to make sure that everyone has a fair shake at the ballot, including independent candidates. They were instrumental in helping to pass ranked choice voting in my home state of Maine, as well as in New York City, as well as pretty much anywhere that ranked choice voting has been passed, as well as a number of other really important reforms that make it easier for independents to win their elections. So check out Represent Us. They also have a really wonderful set of resources for volunteers. Final thoughts, Amanda, words of wisdom as we wrap up the call?
I mean, I would just say kind of my two mantras, recruit for and from every event. And then remember that people come for the candidate or the cause and they stay for the people. So making sure that you're creating just an environment that volunteers want to be a part of and want to continue to be a part of long term.
Awesome. Sally, I see your question. Can we get a copy of the video? We will post a recording of this training by noon tomorrow in Circle. We have every single training that we have ever done, including the last training I did with Sue over a year ago in the Good Party Academy live recording section of our Circle account. So you can watch literally hundreds of hours of trainings like these to level up your skills. It's one of the best parts of that community that we have. So be sure to join Circle to get access to the recording. All right, everyone. Thank you all and have a wonderful night. I will see you in 2 weeks.